This is Devlog, an office-themed roguelike that I've been developing for over 2 years. However, about a year ago, I completely restarted the game, going from something that looked pretty good to literally nothing. The reason I gave at the time was bad code, but this was a lie. You see, over the 2 years that I've been making this game, there's been a problem that I haven't been able to fix. Something I never mentioned in any of my videos because, honestly, I was scared to admit it. But at this point, there's no escaping it, so here we go. This game has never been fun. It wasn't fun before the restart, it certainly wasn't fun after, and even when it still looked like this, it simply wasn't fun. Thousands of hours spent developing it, and yet somehow I just couldn't figure it out. Why? What am I doing wrong? And more importantly, what do I need to change? To answer those questions, we need to go all the way back to the start, when the player was still a robot and you were shooting green bullets. Because here, the game was about to change forever, with this drawing. It was the start of the Office theme, the thing that has come to define the game. However, it also completely shifted my focus. Where previously I was mostly working on gameplay, now it was more about art. In other words, I was prioritizing looks over gameplay. My first problem. This meant that everything I did from then on was more about how something looked rather than how it felt. And about a week later, that meant we had a pretty decent looking game with some awful gameplay. I was aware of this, of course, but I convinced myself that if I just worked on the game some more, it would eventually fix itself and become fun. It obviously never did, and that's partly because of a second problem: these videos. You see, when you're making videos about a game, you're always going to be focused on how it looks, because this is simply more interesting than something like this. This meant I always made sure everything I added looked good, but barely cared for how it felt to play. A perfect example of this is the Office-themed guns video, which coincidentally has the most views. In this video, I made 5 guns based on Office equipment, and these guns on the surface seemed very fun to use. In reality though, they were horrible. None of them felt satisfying to shoot, and only one of them, the pencil rocket, had any kind of unique gameplay. In fact, they were so bad that I never used them again after that video, and although I kept telling myself that I would fix them at some point, I never did. Another example is this video, which was literally about making the game playable, but even here I was cutting corners everywhere I could. For example, the elevator, the thing that was literally in the video's thumbnail and was supposed to create the game loop the video was about, never actually worked. The player just walks into a collider, a closing animation plays, and then nothing. The elevator did nothing. Instead, I just edited 2 recordings together and made it seem like it was happening in-game. In fact, there wasn't even an actual room in the game that had an elevator. Basically, if something wasn't necessary for a video or couldn't be seen in a video, I most likely never made it. But why? If I'm supposed to be making a game, why am I so focused on these videos? Especially when it's hurting the game I'm making? Well, it's because of my third problem: motivation. You see, motivation for me comes from obsession. I'm either completely obsessed with something and have tons of motivation for it, or I'm not and have very little motivation. There's not a lot in between. So whenever I first start working on a new game, I'm completely obsessed with it and have tons of motivation. However, as time goes on, days turning into weeks, that obsession starts to go away, quickly followed by all the motivation I had for the game. This makes it difficult for me to work on a large-scale project. Luckily, I found a solution, because every time I start working on a new video, I regain my obsession, because the video is a new, fresh thing. This leads me to finally be motivated to work on the game again. The problem is that that motivation isn't actually for the game, but for the video instead. So anything not relevant to the video gets almost completely ignored, causing all of the issues we already discussed and many more. Okay, so clearly these are some big problems causing some major issues for the game. So how do we solve them? Well, step 1 is what I just did: transparency. It's a lot more difficult for me to cut corners when you watching the video are aware of it. Step 2 is getting the game into a playable state as soon as possible, because when I do, I can start having people playtest the game. This not only forces me to work on features not visible in videos, but also gives me valuable feedback about how the game feels to play. And lastly, step 3, focus on fun. This might be the most important one, because previously I thought if I just added enough stuff, fun would eventually just happen. Clearly, I was wrong. So my new approach is to make everything I add fun on its own. This means no more waiting until the game is further along or more fleshed out. If I'm working on something, I'm going to try and make it as fun as I can right then and there. These 3 steps should solve a lot of the problems I have, but obviously it's not perfect. There's so many things that could still go wrong, and all I can ask is for your patience. But for now, as a reward for sitting through all that personal nonsense, I have some actual progress to show you. Okay, let's start with how the game currently looks. I don't think it's ugly or anything, but there are some clear issues. Yes, I'm aware that I just talked about prioritizing art over gameplay and how that's a bad thing, but that doesn't mean art should be ignored, it just shouldn't come at the cost of gameplay. And in this case, I actually think I've made some good improvements. For example, as long as this project has existed, I've struggled with walls. They're always too bland and never seem to fit the rest of the game. However, recently I thought I fixed this because these walls actually look pretty good, but the reason they do is because of this dirtiness and grime I added, which yes, does make it look better, but that obviously doesn't work for any of the higher floors. Like an executive floor can't have these walls, so I redesigned them, making them shorter and adding these lines. This makes them look detailed without actually needing any details. Another thing I fixed are the room borders, which were previously just a couple of dark grey pixels, and after that just a black void. The visibility on this was awful, and it seemed more like the room just abruptly ended rather than there being a border. So I changed it to this, where the wall itself is a clearly visible bright line, transitioning into ceiling tiles which then fade into the background, which I think is a huge improvement. Another thing that also looked very bland was the floor, and even though I tried fixing it by, again, adding dirt and grime to it, I don't think I did a very good job, so I redesigned that as well. Now we have tiles, and even though tiles may seem like an obvious choice, I was always very hesitant to add them, since it's very easy for them to look repetitive or just straight up bad. But by keeping it very, very subtle, I think it actually works quite well. Okay, last thing I redesigned was the desk, because although I really like the old design, it also uses, you guessed it, dirt and grime as details. So I went in the complete opposite direction, simplifying it as much as I could. There's basically no detail, but it also doesn't feel like it needs it. Obviously I will add stuff on top of the desk at some point, but for now I like it the way it is. Okay, so that's the updated art. Now let's move on to the gameplay. We're going to start by making a new project. And no, it's not a full reset, I just need a clean environment to work in. In fact, the first thing we're going to do is import a bunch of code from the old project. After that though, we're going to create a new scene and fill it with the floor tile we made earlier. This will give us a nice little testing environment. Next, we're going to add the player. And again, no improvements here. We're just going to import the art, cut them into pieces, create the animations, make a movement script, and voila, we've got a player. But we do need to look into one thing, because I've gotten a lot of comments about this walking animation. A lot of people seem to think it's rather ugly, and I completely agree. The thing is, I've already tried making a better one, but for some reason I just can't do it. I've probably spent like a dozen hours trying, and somehow this is the closest I've gotten, which is clearly not very good. So if you think you can improve this animation, please show me. There's a dedicated channel in the Discord for suggestions like this, and hopefully you guys can come up with something better, because I clearly can't. Okay, next up we have a big gameplay change that has everything to do with how guns work. You see, previously guns worked like this. You play the game, find a gun, pick it up, and that's pretty much all there is to it. Clearly, that's just very boring. Now, I could make it a little bit more interesting by adding things like chests and keys, just like Enter the Gungeon does, but I think we can go even further than that. Because ever since the start of the game, people have requested being able to pick up objects to use as weapons. However, I never really liked this, because most objects would probably just be melee weapons, and I just really prefer the feel of guns. So my solution is a combination of the two. Craftable guns. Basically, you'll be able to pick up various objects around the office and then combine those to create guns. This also adds a long needed bit of strategy to the game. Like, what objects are you going to combine? Are you going to wait until you find a specific combination, or are you just going to try something new? Combine this with a limited inventory and this could lead to some very interesting decisions. I'm actually really excited about this, but I also know it's going to be a lot of work, so we're not going to implement it just yet. Instead, we're going to be making one of those combined object guns, specifically the combination of a desk and a printer. But before we get to that, this video is actually sponsored by Incogni. So I don't show my face on the internet. It's the reason you've seen this guy the entire video instead of me. In fact, I try and reveal as little information about myself as I can. This is because I really value my privacy and don't want some random strangers to have my personal information. However, because I'm also chronically online, I'm not actually doing a very good job at protecting that information, because every time I visit a website, accept cookies, make an account, or even give my email address, data is being collected about me. Things like my name, home address, birthday, phone number, or even who my family members are. This is not data I want publicly available, but what makes it so bad is that it doesn't stay with the website that I visit or the company I buy something at, because eventually my data is going to end up at data brokers, companies whose entire business model is selling our information. This means someone could go to these companies and literally buy identifiable information about me, which is a terrifying thought. Luckily, there is something I can do. I am legally entitled to get my data removed from these companies. However, because they are obviously aware of that, they purposely make it as difficult as they can to do so. And that's where Incogni comes in. They scan the internet for any data brokers that have my information and automatically send removal requests on my behalf. And they don't just do it once, they keep going until my data is and stays removed. In just the last month, they've sent more than 40 requests on my behalf, and so far 30 companies have deleted my data. And most of these companies I'd never even heard of, and I certainly wouldn't have known if they even had my information. But now I don't have to worry about any of that anymore, and I can hide behind this guy forever. So if you want to protect your personal information, go to incogni.com/Deynum and get 60% off your subscription. Thank you so much to Incogni for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to it. Okay, so what would a gun that's part printer and part desk actually shoot? I came up with a couple of different ideas. For example, how about a desk drawer with a bunch of paper in it? Or maybe one giant piece of paper with an image of a desk on it? Or maybe just straight up pieces of wood covered in ink? And although I don't hate any of these ideas, I want this gun to be really satisfying to shoot. So instead, I decided to go with a desk made out of paper. The idea is this: you shoot a giant paper desk that, as it flies through the air, loses basically all of its paper, scattering it absolutely everywhere. This not only gives it a limited range, but we could even make it do a different amount of damage depending on how much paper is left. I'm actually really excited about this idea, so let's just go make it. I started by drawing a couple variations of falling paper. I tried to make it look as if they were going really fast before quickly decelerating, and I do think I managed to capture that somewhat, although it's better in some than others. Next, I had to import those animations into the game and turn them into prefabs that we can spawn behind the desk. Here you can see my first attempt at spawning them behind an invisible moving object. Of course, we don't want it to be invisible, so here's what I made for the desk itself. It's a very simple animation, but I think it'll do the trick. Now, combining those, we get something that looks like this. And right about now, you might be starting to see what I imagined, but we're not done yet, because what followed was a lot of tweaking, making it faster, slower, increasing the paper, decreasing the paper, and a bunch more stuff until we eventually got this. Now, you can't tell me that that doesn't look awesome, and we're not even shooting it ourselves right now. Actually, let's go and fix that. Now, I do have to mention that the gun design is temporary. We're going to be making a lot of these kinds of guns in the future, so I'm sure I'll get way better at it, at which point I'll redesign the gun entirely. But for now, I actually quite like it. It's a bit messy, but overall not terrible. However, it can be a bit difficult to distinguish what the gun is actually made out of. That's why all guns are going to have a higher resolution version, which we're going to use in things like the crafting menu. Here, for example, you can much more clearly see that this gun is made out of a desk drawer and a printer. And having seen that version, it becomes much easier to recognize in in the actual gun. Okay, so with the gun finished, I just made a quick shooting animation, put that in the game, and now the moment... oh, that's not good. It seems there's a problem with the aiming. Oh, that's interesting. Sorry, let me figure out what the issue is. Okay, it was an issue with the camera, because the previous project used a 2-camera setup to get pixel perfect rendering, and we didn't have that in this project, so that was causing some issues, but I fixed it. We now also have 2 cameras in this project, which means everything is now pixel perfect. As you can see here with the gun, every rotation, it's no longer like anti-aliased, it's just like actual pixels. It doesn't look very good up close, I will admit, but from a further distance, which is how you would normally see it, it actually looks kind of... okay, wait, no, we were shooting the gun. We were going to shoot the gun for the first time. That's what we're doing. Let's get back to it. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Oh, I'm a bit disappointed by that. I thought it would be more satisfying. To be fair, like, I didn't add screen shake yet, so let me try and do that real quick. Okay, here we go. Second try with screen shake this time. Let's hope it has a bit more impact. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Wow, I can feel that in my boat. Do that again. Okay, that's very nice, but I do feel it's a bit much for like a regular weapon in the game. Let's tone it down just a little bit. Okay, that's perfect. I actually really love this. In fact, shooting this gun for the first time, I experienced something this game hasn't given me for a long time. Because when I shot this gun, I had fun.